I know that I like to talk about things, but I don't want to waste your time, so I want to straight up tell you before we even start talking about this episode of Rejected Media that as of right now, there is no concrete information on what this pitch or project that had been started from WB Games Montreal would have been, except that at one point, actually recently, kind of surrounding the release of the Flash film, they had decided to work on a Flash video game. And I think it's kind of funny whenever I talk about this, despite the thumbnail. I talked about Flash games before. People thought I meant Adobe Flash, like, on your browser. I mean the Scarlet Speedster himself. Whether it's Wally West, Barry Allen, which is much more likely considering that it was kind of around the time of the DCEU film, or anyone else, Bart Allen, Jay Garrick, etc. I mean, there's a lot of Flashes. So, Jason Schreier of Bloomberg, who I know a lot of people don't like, but who I do think has been, honestly, he's had a track record of successful news and like reliable news drops. He actually released a Bloomberg article, probably yesterday when this comes out, talking about kind of the failures of WB Games. And I'm going to link that in the description down below. I think it is a very interesting read. It gets into things like the Wonder Woman game having a lot of problems, which supposedly has already cost $100 million and had to be restarted almost from the ground up. That is the Monolith one. I don't know how Monolith has an issue with the game. I mean, but when you think about her capabilities, like what she can do, I would think a character like Talion, in those games, like in Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, or a character like Kratos in God of War, I would think you have a template of what she could do, right? I'm not saying she's going to go tear off heads, things like that, but her physical capabilities, those have been put out there. Using swords, using whips, superhuman strength, all of these things. It's like if you nailed the story and you already had the Nemesis system down, which they went out of their way to patent and make so no one else could use, I would think that that wouldn't have problems, but apparently it has. And there was kind of this time with WB Games Montreal going back and forth over and over where they couldn't decide on a project after Gotham Knights. They pitched Constantine as a game, which would have been really cool. Jill asked who he was earlier, and I described him almost like a douchey homeless Doctor Strange, but for DC, which I know is like a very big simplification, but essentially like he's this guy who's dabbling in the world of human and magic and the supernatural. And he, crosses over with DC superheroes all the time. I mean, that could have been a really interesting way to expand your DC universe. They passed on that concept, and then they settled on the Flash. So we're going to talk about this for a few minutes today because I want WB to be successful, not like because it does anything for me. Like, it's not like I have some kind of stake in the company, but because I know how good their characters are when handled correctly. I think when handled correctly, WB has some of the best characters in fiction. I'm not saying they have the best. I'm just saying some of them. You look at the Matrix. You look at when they were doing all this stuff with, with Lord of the Rings, with the world of Tolkien. You look at the stuff with all of their superheroes under their belt. Like, they have a lot of great characters, or have had access, even the Looney Tunes, to great characters over the years, some of the most iconic in at least Western fiction, and they found a way to consistently fumble the bag on it in almost every way, which is just mind-boggling to me. So I do have a question of the day for you real quick, which is actually, what would you have wanted to see from a Flash game? Otherwise, if that's not even something you're interested in, what DC superhero, not Batman, okay, not Batman, we know we're going to get more of that, would you have wanted to see? Now, I think in general, WB has been learning the wrong lessons. Allegedly, at least according to Jason Schreier, according to the interviews he did, according to the research he did, this game, it was something that they couldn't get off the ground for a long time. And I'm hoping that we will get more information later on what this could have been. In case you don't remember, and it's something I probably will take a look at in the near future, there was a previously scrapped Flash game. I believe it was like, what was it, like the end of the PS2 and original Xbox era? It was either that or the very beginning of PS3, Xbox 360 era. And it never made it off the ground. Like, it was in development, they were actively working on it, and that didn't happen. It got canned. So then, you cut forward to now, And in 2025, we're finding out that there was a chance for another one, and it also got canned. But essentially that there were all of these problems around WB Games Montreal, which is why I actually recommend you read some of this article. It's very interesting to me. The part that you might want to find, I did Control F, and I just searched Flash. If you don't want to read the entire thing, it's about 2/3 of the way down. I would say about 2 or 3 paragraphs before that, he starts getting into some of the interesting problems at Warner Bros. Itself with the games division, talking about how essentially there was all of this mismanagement. There were all of these different things too, like where they were looking at other companies. They were looking at things like Grand Theft Auto Online and Destiny, and they were looking at these recurring revenue streams. And Warner Bros. Basically became this studio that wanted to go after live service. And they were using the buzzword digitally powered to kind of describe their goal to go for live service games. Now, what's interesting to me here is that he then talks about how the Montreal studio began working on a new live service Batman game that it hoped would freshen up the franchise by ditching Bruce Wayne. Now, this is actually Gotham Knights, essentially, because halfway through development, as it struggled to make progress on the new project, the studio dropped the live service component of it, and then in 2022 released Gotham Knights, which we all know, like, some of you guys like, some of you really don't. I think it's okay. I kind of classify it the same way as I classify Marvel's Avengers. It's not offensively bad or anything. There's some good things about it, but overall, I don't really think it was that special of a game. So it really seems like what ended up happening there was they were making a live service Batman game, which makes sense because Gotham Knights has some elements in it that feel like they were repurposed from that. And then it got repurposed into Gotham Knights, and that stuff was stripped out, kind of leaving a game that was received so-so. But that said, they then wanted to make an improved 1.5 type version of Gotham Knights. To me, this kind of says like that it was going to expand on the original, but that their bosses said no to that, and then basically moved WB Games Montreal's staff to help out with other projects across Warner Bros. And then the people left were essentially pitching different projects. They were like, well, what if we do one about Constantine? You know, and they wanted to do that. But then what ended up happening was when they were asked to get budget and timeline approvals, they kind of remained non-committal with it. Then they decided to change it, and they were like, well, hey, people like The Flash, right? We'll do one based on The Flash. That would be a good idea. I mean, The Flash is a superhero. He's had this long TV career. He's had comics off and on forever. There's been multiple Flashes, obviously the DCEU film, and they decided, well, we'll do that. But then for some reason, because they were choosing between Joker and Flash, by the way, I don't know how they would have done the Joker game without that being like the most brutal thing ever. They landed on The Flash, and then in 2023, when the Flash movie came out with Ezra Miller, it essentially bombed at the box office, and then the video game was scrapped following it for that reason. So what's interesting about this to me is when Flash came out, the movie, and I want to be clear here, I don't think I'm always right. I think some people think that I think I'm always right. But when the Flash movie came out, I reviewed it, and I said, you know, that I liked parts of it, I didn't like parts of it, I thought the ending was terrible, I thought it was non-committal, I thought that it didn't decide to reboot a universe really in a meaningful way, nor did it decide to close the chapter on the DCEU. I personally thought they should have just, you know, left it alone and maybe done some comic books or maybe some cartoons or something like that in that universe, you know, appease those fans. I liked that universe for what it was with its flaws, and then started their new universe if they wanted. But one thing that I said about it was, I guarantee that if this movie does bad, they are going to think people don't like The Flash. And I remember when I said that, there were people like, oh, there's no way they're that stupid. You know, I don't remember if I said it in my video or if I said it on Twitter. But lo and behold, the main reason that this game is supposedly scrapped is because they think people don't like The Flash. They genuinely believe that that is the reason that the Flash movie failed. Now, it's possible that they're just lying through their teeth, like that this is ultra copium. They know that Ezra Miller running around kind of being a menace, at least allegedly, but honestly ending up in so many court cases, so many different issues, restraining orders, things caught on tape, etc. I mean, hey, We had the infamous Miller Watch segment during that time, one of my proudest moments. I'm going to roll the intro for it right here.
I'm transgender, non-binary, and I don't want to be searched by a man. I claim my Fourth Amendment rights.
Welcome back, Miller Watch Nation. I'm your host, Degenerate Jay. I mean, like, the evil part of me hoped Ezra Miller would keep doing this stuff because, like, I had just come up with this intro for Miller Watch. I was having fun, I was covering lunacy. Like, Looney Tunes were happening in real life with this actor. And people knew that, like, people were paying attention. People noticed it in the news. I genuinely guarantee that Ezra's actions there affected the film. I also guarantee that the marketing of the film affected the film. You were marketing towards nostalgia of Batman 1989, and that was about it. There wasn't, and I love Batman in 1989, but there wasn't really anything else to the marketing, and they were non-committal on pretty much everything, and then the movie came out, and people felt the ending was non-committal and kind of weak too. Even if they ignored all the other flaws, like that was, the note you leave on the theater was just a bummer. It was like, what happened? I genuinely thought the movie was working up until about 10 to 15 minutes before it ended. And then it was kind of like, why? Why did you go this way? But one thing I thought was they really are going to think people don't like The Flash. People said, no, they won't think that. They're not that dumb. Yeah, they're dumb, but they're not that dumb. And then Andy Muschietti or whatever his name is, the director, really came out on a podcast like a month ago, and I talked about that, and confirmed that was his takeaway was, well, I've talked to people and like a lot of people don't like the Flash. The character doesn't score well with different demographics. Obviously the character, like women don't care for the Flash, stuff like that. And it's like women were a huge audience on the CW. Okay. Like I was one of the only men I knew watching Supernatural. The rest of them were watching it because they wanted to see Jared Padalecki and Jensen Ackles like pecs on display. Okay. I was watching it for like supernatural thriller storylines and the pecs. But regardless, women watched the CW and the Flash was super successful on that, right? It got multiple seasons. I mean, even when the show became about the Flash answering his Bluetooth every other, second to ask for advice from Team Flash on what to do, and the show's writing fell off a cliff, people still liked Grant Gustin and they liked the Flash. The Flash wasn't the problem. What sucks to me about this is it seems like this was far enough in development that there at least would have been concept art. There at least would have been a proposed pitch for what the story would be worked around. There at least would have probably been a main villain picked out. We don't know how far in development this was, and we might not see more of it for years, or disgruntled employees might leak more within the week. We don't know. And that's why from now on, when I do Rejected Media, I'm going to be giving you my business email, my Gmail, which is degeneratejbusiness@gmail.com. If you ever are or are connected to or know someone who works on one of the projects we talk about that is canceled, I would love to talk about something they have to say, whether they want anonymity, which I could provide, or not. They don't care. I would love to talk about these things because like you never get to see the leftovers of these projects until years later, if even. These studios are so secretive, but the TLDR of it, of what we know, is Warner Bros. Is mismanaged, has been mismanaged for many years. We've known that for many years. They screwed up. They've been doing that for many years. They proposed the Flash game. It started to get off the ground. We don't know how far. It got canned. Probably not super far because it seems like this was all happening after the launch of Gotham Knights, when video game development was starting to ramp back up after COVID wound down. People were going back to the office, things were starting to get back into a rhythm, and it took them a few months to actually pick the Flash. So what does that leave them? Like after COVID, after Gotham Knights, like we're looking at maybe a year window here of work, possibly. Probably no prototypes, probably no, builds or anything like that with how long games take, but there probably were some assets, there probably was concept art, there probably were pitches. We don't know what those are because nobody wants to talk about it. And something I mentioned on Twitter is the thing that's difficult with these projects, if they're not at least 10 to 15 years old, there are sometimes NDAs in place. There are sometimes understandings of, well, they're going to know that I was the concept artist, so I was the only one who had this. So if I release this, I might not get work again. And especially with David Zaslav and kind of the tighter management at WB now over all of this, I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about things. Like they're afraid to say, hey, I worked on this thing. here were some of the ideas, it never went anywhere, because they don't want to be boxed out of that industry, which I personally think is unfortunate. Once the news of this is out, it's like, why not just say what it could have been and gauge some interest? Like, why does it have to be a national secret? I don't get it, but they've always run things this way. It is hell to get information on canceled projects if they're less than 15 years old, and even if they're more than that, a lot of the times the developers by then have had so many bad experiences on the internet that they don't want to talk to you. That's the experience I've had trying to speak to them, which sucks, because this has left this project in a place where it's gone. And also, even as mentioned over here by Jason Schreier, most of WB Games Montreal's leadership has resigned now. So a lot of the people who were there just aren't there at all. These are the people, by the way, that I feel like would know the most. But again, it's like, I know a lot of people don't want to risk a potential backlash in the industry by talking about things and then worrying that they're going to be seen as a blabbermouth and not get in our job. So it's just a sucky situation, but essentially it's all kind of blamed on corporate. It's all kind of blamed on people at the top and what their mandates are and what they want. And I would say at some point, it's like, you know, at some point I'd say, well, is it really the people at the top? Like, this is a pattern of behavior, but also like, it's a pattern of behavior across all of their studios. I don't think it's like the developers. I don't think it's even the heads of development at a lot of these things. I think it really is, there's this culture, or there has been this culture with WB, where I think they've had this idea of like, we're WB, we own some of the greatest characters, we can do whatever we want. And they're not sitting on the kind of money that Steam is. You know, they're not Gabe Newell. They're not sitting on money where they can just decide to not make Half-Life 3 for 20 years because they're raking in cash on other stuff. They have to make something. And they don't. They don't really make anything anymore. How many other projects have been canceled? Like, you had not just WB Games Montreal, but you had pitches for a Superman game. We've had at least 2 Superman projects in gaming that have been canned. We've had others that have been pitched, you know, with concept art. We had the Damian Wayne Batman Beyond game. I still think it should have been Terry, but supposedly in the Arkham universe, which it looks like it was Project Sabbath. You know, we had this Gotham Knights 1.5, which didn't happen. We had The Flash. There was a Flash game before this in a previous generation. Like, just off the top of my head, that's 7 games. And I can think of those without any research. That's insanity. It's like you're not making anything. They even had a Suicide Squad game they were thinking about making. So I'll let you know if we find out more information on this going forward. I just think it's sad. It's like, what is there to say about it except it's sad? They genuinely think, or at least they're telling themselves this, like maybe it's kind of like when your wife is in the other room, you know, and you hear the pounding and you're telling yourself like, this is gonna save our marriage, you know? Maybe it's like being in the Hallmark executive cuck chair and you're kind of like just trying to turn up live action Scooby-Doo 2 between the screams to not hear it, to drown out the sadness in your mind. Maybe it's like that. Like they're just kind of cucking themselves and they're thinking like, well, if we tell ourselves this enough, it's true, right? Right? Or Principal Skinner, am I out of touch? No, it's the kids that are wrong. That pretty much describes WB, a company that is cucking itself and screaming into its own hands that everyone is wrong except for it. And it's very frustrating to watch over the years as a big fan of their characters. Like I said, if you ever have information about this or anything else we talk about, be sure to let me know. You can always let me know in the comments, but where I'm most likely to see it, because, you know, comments, there ends up being a lot of them across these channels, is I'm most likely to see it in my business Gmail, degeneratejbusiness@gmail.com. Always appreciate that kind of stuff. Also, as well, if you enjoyed the video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know your thoughts down below. I do appreciate that very much. Trying to grow all of our channels this year. I will be including the other channels in the description. We have at least 3 more, so I'd love to see you over there. As well as we have our own store, cosmobunny.shop. Coasters, keychains, trays, and more from recycled paper, from comics, manga, magazines, pamphlets, and more that have been damaged. These are essentially paper from books, cannot be sold. Those books are on their way to landfills a lot of times. We take them for dirt cheap or nothing, turn some of the paper into new art for your home transformatively, and we recycle the rest. So code DJAY123 gets you 10% off over there. And of course, as well, that is our Fortnite code, which goes to help our channel quite a bit. I appreciate those of you who have used it. Huge thanks to you guys. It means a lot. YouTube is not a super stable platform for me. So when you guys do that kind of stuff, it helps support the channel, and I appreciate you. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.